It's been a while since I told her story. Been a busy week. Um, I was struck recently by how life can be a circle. Um, I first moved to St. Louis a few months ago. The actions in Afghanistan were winding up and getting very heated. I never served in Afghanistan. I served three Iraq tours. I never deployed to Kabul or Afghanistan. And as my fellow veterans were ramping up to help our refugee partners and our special immigrant visa partners, to literally help them escape the country, I really had no place to do that. So what I did was I turned locally with a local refugee settlement agency. And again, I just didn't really have a connection to Kabul. And then when that explosion struck in late August, just a horrifying event. 13 American service members killed, hundreds of Afghans, and I was just heartbroken by it. But only later would I find out that I actually did have a personal connection to it, and that someone I really have a lot of respect for and have known for many years was deeply involved in that moment. And that young man's a guy named Geoff Ball, and Geoff is actually a guy I've told stories about for years. I first met this young man when I was first starting my company way back in 2010, 2011. Geoff, this young man, was joined the Marines and was running the newly formed Veterans Interest Group at George Washington University. And he reached out to a mutual friend named Alex Horton, who has now reported at the Washington Post, and asked him if he knew anybody who could help him with media relations and social media. And Alex recommended me. And I had a rule in the early days of my company when I was in DC. I took every meeting. I don't have that luxury anymore, unfortunately, but I took all these meetings with these young men and women who reached out to me, veterans, usually veterans who were starting a business or a student veterans group or whatever. And so Geoff and I met for lunch one day, coffee, had a great conversation. I find out he was running a day of service there in Washington, D.C., a remarkable project. He ended up running 6 different projects around the Washington, D.C. area with a number of really great nonprofits like TAPS and others. We had a speaker. They kicked it off with the senior enlisted advisor, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs being the speaker. Just a great day. And I ended up kind of being Geoff's driver that day. He was running all over town, and his driving was terrifying me because he was so busy. And I said, you know what, let me drive. And just a great young man who ended up being commissioned as a Marine Corps officer later. Flash forward about a year, I get a call one day or an email from Geoff. He's like, hey, I'm at I'm doing an internship, and they're getting ready to launch in a couple of weeks. And could really use your help of your company and what you guys do. And I was like, well, where are you working? He's like, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. I'm like, okay. Libby Dole? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, I've heard of her. I'm kind of a super fan of Mrs. Dole and her husband. Of course, great World War II veteran, Senator Bob Dole. As it turns out, Mrs. Dole had spent quite a few weeks in Walter Reed Hospital when Bob was ill one time, and had really gotten to know the young women and men, families who were taking care of our injured and wounded service members and ill, and really found a special place in her heart for these caregivers, and discovered that there was no organization dedicated just to helping our caregivers. So Senator Elizabeth Dole launched that, and Geoff was an intern, and so he set me up a meeting, and I met Mrs. Dole and her staff. She and I hit it off just wonderfully, but I'm not sure anybody doesn't. Mrs. Dole is just that kind of person, and God bless them, they hired us right after that, and we helped her launch that program. I ended up helping her on and off many years while I owned my company, and to this day, Mrs. Dole I consider just a wonderful supporter of me, and I'm a huge fan of hers, to the point where when I was in New York running our COVID field hospital there, the Ryan F. Larkin COVID field hospital, one night I'm sitting at my desk and my phone rings and I answer it, and it's Senator Dole. And she had read a newspaper article about me running this hospital and wanted to reach out and offer her support, which is pretty cool. But back to Geoff. So Geoff, we did that together, and then he graduated from George Washington University and ended up being a commissioned as a Marine officer. I told the story for many years of that relationship, how every meeting is important, that you never know who somebody's going to be. And the great thing about Washington is someone who's nothing more than a student veteran today could end up being the executive director of a nonprofit 6 months from now. And that was always where the story ended, but the story doesn't end there. So Afghanistan. As it turns out, I was on Facebook one day later, And Geoff posted the heartbreaking news that 9 of those Marines that had been killed in that explosion were his. He was a company commander in the Marine Corps, Ghost Company 2-1 Infantry Marines. And thus, a young man who I've known for over a decade, and just think the world of, has now joined a fraternity that I don't wish upon anybody, a fraternity that includes, losing soldiers or Marines or your service members beneath you. And I've reached out to Geoff since, and he's just a good man, and he's dealing with that. And he actually recommended a nonprofit, so I'll post that in the newsletter that about his service members, Marines, and others that were lost that day. You could help them. But the arc of time is long. The military community, while large, is actually small, and you just never know who you might meet and who matters. So anyway, fascinating story how life turns. Thanks.